So we were speaking about this idea that every desire, every inner desire has its own way of expression, as its own, as it called it in Kabbalistic language or in the language of the Tanya, clothing. And really the goal of man is to first and foremost ask himself what he truly wants, what he or she truly wants. What do I want based on what my soul wants? Why was I sent here to this world, really? That's the very big question. It's not always answerable, but the desires of the soul can very often be identified. As we mentioned, some people want to better the world. Now, it's not necessarily that in order to better the world that you have to be a worker. You can be a social worker. You can be you don't have to be a doctor. You can be a nurse. Everyone has to find the right clothing for the inner desire, because the clothing will also channel that desire in the best of ways. If I wear something that doesn't fit me, like we were saying, if I wear a shirt that is too tight on me, then it will in a way suffocate my desire. So the first question that one needs to ask himself is, what is my true desire? And that's really what we're speaking about. Now, obviously, we have multiple desires within us. We have desires that come from the animal soul and desires that come from the godly soul. Here, obviously, we're speaking about the desires that come from the godly soul. Those are the desires that need the right expressions. They need clothing, because the more we give them clothing, the more our soul will feel fulfilled and even liberated. And really, that in a way is the ultimate purpose. So that's really the big idea in just a minute of what we're speaking about. Let's continue. 41, the ways in which desire expresses itself. Does anyone want to read? And I'm not here. She usually reads, but
I'll read.
Thank you, Amy. Go for it.
Okay. The ways in which desire expresses itself is the result of education, which begins at the moment a child is aware of himself. Our problem is in these initial stages. Education tends to describe the material world as the only real world, and realities that cannot be visualized are discounted as insignificant and are therefore not desired. Because our initial perception of reality is that only the material is material, material things automatically become the things that the person wants and desires.
Right. Let's stop here for a second, because I think that this is really spot on regarding the way our society functions today, unfortunately. Because if you think about this, to put it differently, to put what Rabbi Stein is saying here differently, we can ask ourselves, look at our society, look at ourselves. When do we compliment our children? We compliment our children for the good looks, something quite physical. We compliment our children for good grades, something also quite measurable and physical. We compliment our children for the good athletic achievements or musical achievements. Musical is more soulful, so I have to be careful with that, but athletic is also physical. So many of the compliments we give our children, think about this, are really purely for things that are physical. So what are we doing with that? Fine. It doesn't mean that we can't compliment our children and we can't give them trophies for physical achievements. That's fine. But that should have been the emphasis. Because when we are doing this, we are achieving that which Rabbi Stein is speaking about here. What we are doing indirectly is giving the message to our children that it's the physical that counts most. And when we teach our children that the physical counts most, then all the clothing that they know, to use this language, the only clothing that they know is a physical one. When do we compliment our children for a mitzvah? When do we compliment our children for exercising self-control? We take that as something that's granted. Oh, yeah, you shouldn't have ice cream now. You have to eat dinner. Now, do we? If they didn't have ice cream, they had dinner. Do we compliment our children for that exercise of self-control as much as we've complimented them for receiving a silver medal in track and field? We should. But self-control is not tangible, so we overlook it. But then we teach our children that it's the tangible that counts, not the intangible. So the way we compliment our children really reflects that the truth of Rabbi Stern's word, which is really, to use a very strong word, which is a travesty, because our children should be taught about the intangible and the spiritual self and the divine within the world, just as much, if not more, than we teach them about the physical senses and the material world. But that's where it starts. These are the initial stages of how we can impact our children one way or the other, knowing their internal desire, that divine soul, or not, depending really on what we emphasize as parents. So that's really the idea here. You know, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, also known as the Alter Rebbe or the Baal Tanya, who of course is the author of this book, in some point in the Tanya also speaks about this beautiful analogy of that deals with education, which is the theme here. And that is that education, you know, there is a reason why God compares man to a tree. In Deuteronomy, God says, Ki Adam etz hasadeh. One of the reasons, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi teaches, is because if you think about this, when is the tree most sensitive to that which it receives? When it is young, right? When the tree has just been planted, when that seed is in the ground, that's when it's most sensitive. Whatever it is given at that stage, if I water that seed at that stage, or I don't water it at that stage, if I give it what it needs or don't give it what it needs, that's the way the tree will grow. Now, if I impact the tree when it is already fully grown, then it doesn't make quite of a difference than the difference that it makes when I've planted that seed. Because again, the earlier we are in the planting of the tree and in the growth of the tree, the more impact we can have on it. Same with education. The more impact we have on our children as they grow, the greater that impact will influence their own tree as they become adults. Now, to try, you know, there's a great line that says that it's easier to raise healthy children than to fix broken adults. Why? Because just like a tree, it's easier to raise or to make blossom a tree than to fix a fully fledged tree. Because when it's fully fledged, then there's a lot of work to do, a lot of renovation to do. When it's still in the stage of growth, that's when we can really direct it and channel it in the best of directions. That's really the idea. And that's why Rabbi Stein here puts it that the result of education begins at the moment the child is aware of himself. And it's those initial stages that count most. But that's really the big idea. I'd love to hear your comments. Otherwise, we can continue. But again, comments, disagreements, questions, that's what study is all about. You know, I told a parent last week, speaking of education, but it's just quite interesting. I mean, there's a fine balance, so everyone has to know what the exact balance is that works for their own children. But it's funny because here in CBT we have some trees that are still growing and still maturing, and as you know, many of these trees need a stick, just a dry stick that stands next to them, so that the tree doesn't start spreading its wings everywhere. Right? You've seen it before, that stick that stands next to a tree to make sure that it grows straight. And sometimes, very often, that's also what education needs. But emphasizing the self-control, like we were speaking about, and congratulating and complimenting our children for that self-control. It's that stick that helps them grow strong. If they are not taught and if they are not congratulated and complimented for the intangible, for those moments of self-control, then they get the opposite message. And then they start really growing everywhere or spreading their branches everywhere that can be not just destructive to themselves and to their ultimate growth, but also to the world around them. That's really the idea here. Okay, we can continue. Unless, again, there's comments. Otherwise, Amy or anyone else, let's go to the line that says someone who lives by his desires, the next line.
Okay, someone who lives by Someone who lives by his desires has difficulty distinguishing between the desire itself and the desired object. However, we all observe in others desires that do not pertain to ourselves, and we can view these objectively, analyze them, and demonstrate the difference between desire as desire and desire's selfish garments. For instance, when a football team wins an important match, one can observe people mourning or celebrating something that has no true effect on their individual lives. People dance and rejoice over something that requires a great degree of abstraction to relate to oneself. Why should it matter to Joe the taxi driver which way the ball went? Some say that people are self-centered and only want what they can enjoy and what supplies their own needs. But here we have an example that shows that the situation is not all that simple. This is not to say that this silliness has any virtue, but it can serve us as a model to demonstrate that with a proper conditioning, people can derive a great deal of satisfaction from something that they never saw and that does not supply them with any material benefit. There is no reason why people should not get equally excited over matters of holiness if their environment and education impress them with a different set of priorities.
Right. So this is very powerful, and this passage is not to bash. And actually, it's very apropos because we just had the Super Bowl last week, and many people were happy or were sad. We're happy if you were a Chiefs fan, or sad if you were an Eagles fan. But the big question is, I've never met the Chiefs players. I don't even live in Kansas. Why should I be happy? It has nothing to do with me. But the proof that Rabbi Steinsaltz is trying to get out of this is that, look, we can be happy for things that are completely abstract, that have nothing tangible to them. And if that is true for the Kansas Chiefs, how even more so true it should be for a soul that is intangible. Then when we fulfill it, when we listen to its desire, and we actually accomplish that desire, then that level of satisfaction will be much, much greater than any Super Bowl celebration for the Chiefs. And that is true on an even deeper level, because dare I say that, yes, obviously the heart has many desires. I love chocolate. I desire to eat chocolate. That's one desire. Fine. I also desire to pray. I desire to connect to God. That's another desire. I also desire to help someone else. That's another desire. We have thousands of desires in the heart. But what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here, almost indirectly, is that the strongest desire that we have, this is a very important statement, the strongest desire we have will eventually determine the way our life looks like. So if my strongest desire is soccer, so I guess I'll be a soccer player. I'll be obsessed with soccer. Everything about me will be soccer. My room will be decorated with soccer balls. I'll buy 10 soccer balls. I'll get autographs from soccer, because that's my strongest desire. If my strongest desire is God, then my life will look godly. If my strongest desire is to help others, my life will be determined by that. We have many desires. The question is, what's your strongest one? What's your deepest one? And Rabbi Steinsaltz and the Tanya here are trying to really guide the person towards the strongest desire that we have, that we may not even know that we have. Because the strongest desire that we have really comes from the soul. The soul has much stronger of a desire than the body. Why? Because the soul is stronger than the body. The proof is in life and death. The soul continues to live on. The body doesn't. So the soul is stronger than the body. And the soul will haunt you and haunt you and haunt you with the same desires all life long. The body's desires come and go. When I'm a child, I want ice cream. I want candy. That's what the body wants. When I'm 100 years old, what the body wants is not ice cream and candy. It wants sleep. So the body's desires change. The soul's desires are constant. And they are the strongest. Now, very often what we do is we switch it off. The soul wants something and we say, no, sorry, not now. I don't have time for it. But it haunts and haunts and haunts. And that's really our strongest desire, whether we recognize it or not. Eventually, if we're open to it and we are led by the soul's strongest desire, which is, what's the soul? Soul is a part of God. And God wants to create. God wants to do good. God wants to illuminate the world. God wants to be godly, to pray, to meditate, to be open so that we can seize the opportunities that God presents in front of us. Not about me and my ego or my body. If we're open to those strongest desires and we really allow them to express themselves and clothe them, like the Tanya says here, then we're able also to fashion our lives in a very soulful way, in a very godly way, because again, it is the strongest desire that we have that will eventually determine the way our life will look like. We have many desires, but we have to ask ourselves, maybe every day as we look ourselves in the mirror, what's my strongest desire today? Because that's the way your day will look like. If I wake up in the morning and my strongest desire is to go back to bed and be lazy, that's the way that my day will look like. Let's not look at life. Let's look at day by day. I think it's true on many levels. Now, our desires can change because, again, especially the bodily desires can change, but the soulful desires almost always remain the same. It's to be soulful, to do good.
I'd like to make a comment about trees,
Yes, go for it.
about the trees that you talked about. I think an educator, I think his responsibility is twofold. Number one, to give the roots, and number two, to give the dream. You need roots and you need wings, because if you don't have deep roots and you have a beautiful tree, a wind comes and knocks it down and it's gone. And I've seen it because I've been in a tornado where the trees fell all over the place and the roots were not very deep.
Wow.
Of the trees.
Yeah.
Second thing is, if you have a beautiful tree and all you do is grow and you can't move from where you are, you're very limited. So you need roots and you need wings. And that's what you have to give the student.
Very, very beautifully said. Very beautifully said. That's right. You know, you remind me of the Talmudic statement that says that le'olam ya'adam rach ka'kanev al yeh kashe ka'erez, which means that a person should always be as flexible as a bamboo stick and not as hard-headed as a cedar tree. Because if you think about this, our world loves cedar trees. We love, you know, the show. Cedar trees look strong, look confident, they look stable, they look beautiful. The problem is, like you said, if a tornado comes, or even a hurricane level 3 storm comes, the cedar trees are knocked down, right? But the bamboo sticks, the bamboo trees really remain in their place. Why? Because they have deep roots. And that's really the inner message of the Talmud here, right? That we have to have deep roots. With those deep roots, we can withstand all storms. And I think roots are connected, obviously, to our heritage, to where we come from, to our values. But roots are also built with love, right? And that's what you're giving your grandchildren there too, William. Giving them some strong roots. I saw it yesterday. A lot of love too. Those roots, yeah. Just like a tree, right? When does a tree need when do trees need our love the most? At the very beginning stages. We have to water them and water them and water them and tend to them. And then,
well, Rabbi Akiva said the most important thing you could teach your children is how to swim.
Well, yeah.
But what he meant was to swim in the sea of life, to be able to be independent.
That's right. That's right. But those are the wings that you were referring to, right? Very good. Good.
But you know, she took the thing in front of her, put it down, and slept on it.
Okay. Anyone else?
We have some interference here.
Yes. William, we can hear the background noises of your.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
I'll mute. Okay.
No, but we do want to hear your comment. Okay. So if there's no comment, let's finish this thought and this paragraph here on page 242. Once we are able to draw the distinction, does
You want me to continue?
Unless Amy, you can continue.
Yeah, continue.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Once we are able to draw the distinction, it becomes clear that the distortion lies with the, quote, soiled garments, unquote, rather than the intrinsic drives of the animal soul. Therein lies the hope, the feasibility of the Tanya's program. For the garments can be changed in the very same drives that previously fueled the lowliest of cravings, can now impel the person in the most lofty pursuits, even to the point of self-sacrifice, with the same passion he had for material things, and often with an even greater intensity.
Right. Which reminds me of this great idea of how lobsters grow. I'm sure you've heard it before. You know how lobsters grow? Well, lobsters in the sea, they have a body that within that grows. The problem is that their shell at one point becomes too limiting for their body that has grown. So it feels very confined in that shell. So in order to really grow, the lobster has to find a rock under the sea, hide under that rock so that it's not eaten during this process, and then let go of its shell. And then the body, the grown body within, develops a new shell. And that shell now is more expansive, is greater than the previous shell that it shed. The problem is that after a while, that shell too also becomes confining for the body because the body continues to grow within. So again, it has to go under the rock, let go of that shell and grow a new shell for its new, bigger body. And it does this process multiple times. That's how lobsters grow. What's the lesson in this? First of all, the lesson is that stress is good. People say, I wish I didn't have stress. Stress is good, it makes you grow. That's number one. If the lobster didn't feel stress, it wouldn't grow. So stress makes you grow. Well, number two, what it means is what Rabbi Steinmetz is speaking about here, that we have desires from within. Okay, lobsters have desires from within to grow, and it attended to those desires to grow. Not only attended to those desires and made it itself grow, and it grew and it grew. The soul wants to grow. The soul wants to impact the world more and more. The soul is never satisfied. Always wants to do more and more. Wants to grow. The problem is very often that we find ourselves that we didn't give the right clothing to the soul. The soul needs clothing, needs expression, needs a way to convey its desire in a very physical way, physical sense with clothing, right? So if my soul wants to do good, maybe it's tzedakah. Right? So I give $1 a day. At one point it says, excuse me, $1 a day is no good. You have to give $2 a day. Or maybe it's just not $1 a day. You have to add another type of tzedakah, maybe go start visiting the sick. And then you realize that that tzedakah box is not a good enough clothing for the soul. So you have to ask yourself, how can I make my clothing grow to accommodate the new level of growth that the soul has attained? And that is a constant work. It never stops until 120. Maybe this is why the Talmud says famously, tzadikim ein lahem menucha lo ba'olam hazeh v'lo ba'olam haba, that the righteous have no rest, not in this world and not in the world to come. Why do they have no rest? Because they are walking souls. And if they are walking souls, that means that they are constantly growing and constantly, therefore, finding new clothes, bigger clothes for their inner growth, for the desires of their soul. That's the only thing they're in tune with. And that never stops growing and never stops, therefore, encompassing more and more clothing or finding greater and greater clothing. That's really what the big idea is. Now, the main message of this paragraph was, again, to first and foremost be in tune with our deepest desire and make our deepest desire also the desire that really leads us in life, because that deepest desire is what will determine how our life looks like. And if it's a soulful one, then our life will be soulful and filled with divinity. And that's really the goal of every soul, of every human being.